Hey everyone, so I thought I'd try something a little bit different, and I'm going to be doing this video completely unscripted. I have all the thoughts in my head, and I kind of recited them all to myself last night while I was trying to go to sleep, and I figured I would just do this unscripted since I could kind of ramble them off pretty well in my head. So this video is going to be kind of 2 points in one. The first point is going to be what went wrong with the village update in Resident Evil Reverse, as well as what I would have done differently if I was the head of Capcom, because oh boy, I would have done some stuff differently. And the second part of this video is going to be what would I add to Resident Evil Reverse, because although it's great that the game got a little bit more content recently, it still needs a lot more to really be able to hold up and have longevity. So that's what this video is going to be about. Okay, without further ado, let's hop into the first part of this video, which is what I would have done differently if I was head of Capcom during the Village update. So if you don't know, recently, ReVerse got updated with a bunch of new content recently. The two big draws of this update was a new playable character and a new playable map. If you couldn't tell, a new map that was added into Resident Evil Reverse was the village from Resident Evil Village or Resident Evil 8. As well as the village being a map, we also got a new playable character, Tundra. If you don't know who she is a character that radios Chris at the end of Resident Evil Village during his playable section. So yes, someone we only see in a cutscene and only ever hear. Yeah, that's who they chose. So, what would I have done differently in this update? Well, I'm fine with all the new cosmetics they added, different models for guns, Chris and Jill getting their Resident Evil 5 outfits. And of course, having the village added as a map only makes sense. Village is one of their biggest games, and it deserves to get represented, as well as that the village makes a really good map with how big and open it is. I had to look up who Tundra was, and even when I did, I still didn't have a clear answer on who she was. Eventually I figured it out by reading her wiki page. But even still, I still barely knew anything about her. And that's the problem. There's nothing there to know about her. She's just meant to be a voice that you hear in Chris's headset. While I do like her abilities, the placing a fake virus capsule and being able to shoot something behind you at players chasing you, there's not much to really remember her by. So we all know why she was added. It's very clear that with this update they wanted to add a playable character from Resident Evil Village, but there's so many other better options they could have gone with. First, the most obvious one I'm pretty sure you're all thinking, Ethan Winters. He's the protagonist. You play as him through 7 and 8, and even in Resident Evil 8, Ethan actually gets a lot better moments, which makes him more likable as a character. I'm pretty sure the reason he wasn't even added was because we technically don't know what his face looks like, and if you really want to keep his face a secret, there's other options you could have gone with. There's Rose, the character of the DLC, and since she has the Mutamycete powers, she would have made a very interesting playable character, being able to use her powers against the other players. As well as that, if they really wanted to surprise us, they could have added a new playable Tyrant. Three come to mind for me. The first one, the most obvious, Lady D. She is definitely a fan favorite if you ask anyone on the internet. As well as that, she's playable in the Resident Evil Village DLC in the Mercenaries mode, so they have a moveset planned out for her. It would have been all too perfect to add her in as a Tyrant. Next up on the list is Heisenberg. He has control over metallic objects, so it would have been really cool to see him being able to use that, as well as that he has a giant weapon with his hammer. And just like Lady D, he is also playable in Resident Evil Village Mercenaries mode, so taking inspiration from that, it wouldn't be too hard to add him into Reverse. The last one that I don't think is as likely, but could have definitely happened, is adding Mother Miranda as a Tyrant. For people who don't know, she is the final boss of Resident Evil Village, and she has a great array of attacks that could have been useful in Reverse. But all of those were passed upon. Now, could any of those happen in future updates? Definitely, there's no reason why they can't add Ethan, Rose, Mother Miranda, Lady D, or Heisenberg into any later updates. But it feels a bit more unlikely now that this Village update has happened. So not to end this video on a depressing note, we're going to move on to the second part of this video. In future updates, what would I personally add to Resident Evil Reverse? Well, my first duty of business would be to get representation from all the mainline Resident Evil numbered games. So, 1 through 8. So I'm going to go down the list and we'll take characters and places that could possibly be used as stages. Alright, starting things off with Resident Evil 1. Well, we already have Chris and Jill as playable characters, so I think we're fine on the human front. We could possibly add the Tyrant or Wesker as playable mutants. And if we have to take a level from Resident Evil 1, well, it obviously has to be the Arclight Mansion. It's where the whole setting takes place, just like the Baker House from Resident Evil 7, so it only makes sense to add the mansion from Resident Evil 1. Going on next, the Resident Evil 2 remake, I think we're fine on that front. We have both Leon and Claire in their RE2 outfits in Reverse, as well as that we already have a stage through RPD, the first area of the game, as well as that Mr. X is a playable tyrant, so it feels like we don't really need anything else from Resident Evil 2 remake. Moving on to Resident Evil 3 remake. Well, we do have Jill as a playable character, but we could also add Carlos as a playable character. He doesn't get a lot of love from the series, from what I've heard, being RE3 being his only big appearance. So for possible stages, 2 came to mind for me. Firstly, there's the streets of Raccoon City. You play as that in the tutorial, so they could just expand that level out to give us just a bit more area, and then I think it would make a perfect stage. But another idea I had is the hospital from Resident Evil 3 remake. The hospital is a big building with a lot of corridors that we can run through and shoot each other in. As well as that, you can just knock down some of the walls to make it a bit more accessible. Moving on to Resident Evil 4. There isn't too much we can really add from Resident Evil 4 in terms of playable characters. The only one that really comes to mind is Ashley, but even then she doesn't have much to defend herself because both Leon and Ada are already in Reverse. So if we get anything from Resident Evil 4, it'll most likely be a stage. If I had to add a stage from Resident Evil 4, I probably wouldn't add the village since we already have a stage called Village, but I would probably add the castle or the island. More leaning towards the island because the castle is just way too big, and I know that they're just going to shorten it if they do use the castle, but I have trouble picking where from the castle would we even use as a stage. I don't know, the fortress-like setting of the island just makes more sense to me. Resident Evil 5. So of course we have Chris as a playable character, but just like in Resident Evil 3, we could also add Sheva as a playable character. Just like Carlos, she doesn't get much love from the later games in the series, so this would be perfect to put her into. As well as that, it seems that the team aren't afraid of adding Resident Evil 5 content because we did just get Chris and Jill's Resident Evil 5 outfits. So if we were to get a stage from Resident Evil 5, I'd imagine it would be either your first or last chapter. These areas just make the perfect sense in terms of having a bunch of area to run around in. Resident Evil 6. Resident Evil 6 is definitely not a lot of people's fan favorite, and it's actually the most hated in the series. But Capcom still are willing to acknowledge it, so it's definitely canon. Honestly, I never played Resident Evil 6. I don't know, you guys go wild in the comments over this one. I don't know, the college campus? Sure, we'll go with that one, why not? But in terms of playable characters, we could add any of the partner characters, because only one of them is in Resident Evil Reverse, and even then it's probably not the same guy, because in Resident Evil Reverse they refer to him as Hunk, and in Resident Evil 6 he's referred to as Asian, so it's probably a different guy. But we could add Helena, Piers, as well as Sherry and Jake. Resident Evil 7 already has a lot of content in terms of both the Baker House being a level and Jack Baker being a playable mutant. So Resident Evil 7 probably won't be included, but if we did get a playable character, I'd either want it to be Ethan or Mia, because they're both prominent characters in the Resident Evil 7 story and both have experience using firearms. Alright, I forgot to include mutants in my roundup, so we're just going to keep going back from 1 through 8, but this time talking about tyrants we can add. Okay, let's go. Resident Evil 3, we already have a Nemesis in the game. I don't see a need to add another tyrant from Resident Evil 3. There isn't even one to add, so yeah, Nemesis it is. Resident Evil 4, there are quite a few things we could do here. We could either add... oh god, I don't know their names in Spanish. We could add that Scorpion boss, or we could add the little kid I wanted to punch in my live playthrough, or we could also add Sadler at the end. There's quite an array of mutants we could add from Resident Evil 4 if we wanted to add something quick to Reverse. Resident Evil 5, I think the only thing that makes sense is adding Wesker, definitely, but also the Ouroboros virus. There's a giant boss you fight in at the end of chapter 5, I believe it is. We could add that tyrant into the game. Resident Evil 6, like I said, I haven't played too much of it, but one that makes sense is, I don't know its name, but there is a tyrant that is chasing Sherry and Jake in their story, and it just makes perfect sense to add in here because it's like Nemesis, it chases you, and it's a tyrant, it's unkillable, makes perfect sense to me. Resident Evil 7, we already have a tyrant through Jack Baker, so I don't really see the need for another one, so I'm going to move on to Resident Evil 8. So like I did mention in the beginning of this video, we could add Lady D, Heisenberg, or Mother Miranda. All of them make perfect sense to me to be added as mutants into Resident Evil Reverse. Any one of them I think would make fans exceedingly excited and happy. And with that, that is my video on what we could add to Resident Evil Reverse, as well as what I would have done differently in the Resident Evil Village update. Thank you guys so much for watching. Check out my streams, my cosplay Instagram, the rest of the channel, and my Twitter. Okay, I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.